everyone. This is Dan Gantz here at Spectrum Technologies with David Kelly on the phone as well. Wanted to welcome you to today's webinar, the Incentive Compensation Center of Excellence, Why and How. And we have you on the line here today. So my name is Dan Gantz. I'm a principal here at Spectrum Technologies. In the ICM, SPM space for nearly 20 years. Grew up professional services side of the house, so implementing, configuring, and managing incentive compensation systems a number of years. David Kelly, David, why don't you give your quick background on yourself?
David Kelly, I've been in the ICM industry for 15 plus years, generally speaking on the delivery side as well, but in the role trying to take business environments and turn them into something that looks like a system.
David's a little modest as well. David is a recently published author. He has written a book called, and I'm kidding here, called The Book on Incentive Compensation Management. So, following this webinar, you can say you actually, attended a webinar by the guy who wrote the book, and you would not be wrong. The Spectrum did a blog review of this a couple weeks back, actually probably more than that now at this point, but about three blog entries ago, and our blog site is incent360.com. You can also reach it from Spectrum BizTech website to link over there. But it's a fairly detailed or lengthy review written by our founder. It also contains a link to pop over to Amazon and find that book if you are so inclined. Just take a moment here to talk about Spectrum, what we do. A specialized advisory and services firm focused on sales performance management. We were founded in 2006. We're a global company, headed in Santa Clara, California, with the heart of Silicon Valley. Employee count of something north of 40. National presence in terms of the consultants that we have. Concentrated there in the Bay Area, but as well as sort of national. We have an offshore development center in India, in Mumbai, India. We are the proud sponsors of kind of three major events that happen this year. The next one that's coming up is actually the Spotlight Conference, the World at Work Spotlight Conference in Chicago, which is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. I am presenting there with Rick Butler, and Manish Gupta, our founder, is participating in a panel discussion as well at that event. Spectrum, just in case people are familiar with us, we are our services, then they range kind of, from what we call SPM consulting, and this is to help you with business case preparation, perhaps over year plan modeling. I would say the kind of heavier lifting, higher bandwidth individuals at the firm who can help out with the consulting components. We help companies with SPM selections. We can run vendor eval, sort of prepare you for and manage that whole cycle, that process for you. We do implementation services. We work with a number of the software vendors out there to do this, and so that's just take your system live, from requirement gathering to full. We host implement services, which we call advantage services. These can be delivered on an ad hoc basis or a subscription basis as you go along, and then we also do some training as well in the space. Forward, we're going to talk about some of the challenges unique to incentive compensation management. A little bit of education in terms of the need for a cross-functional team. I think if you're new to the space, it is surprising how many people within your organization get involved with the both design and management of incentive comp. Talk about the Compensation Center of Excellence, why you need it, how to set it up. We're going to hit a few points on implementations on ICM projects and the steering committee. I'll take your questions at the end. Now, question here, or point here on the question. Everybody's on mute. If you have questions that you would like to ask David or myself, please to the host using the WebEx chat feature, and we will get to those questions at the end, time permitting. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand this over to David to run through the deck here. David?
I'm invited to a lot of parties. As I start every conversation with ICM is hard, and there are a variety of reasons why ICM is hard. And And generally speaking, they come down to data and process. And we're going to talk about how things impact an organization and how that makes it even more challenging than just the math in order to actually pay attention to it. I'd ask if you're not speaking, could you put yourself on mute, because I'm hearing a lot of background noise there. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Thanks. The bad guy. All right. One of the challenges we have in the ICM space is data, and there are a lot of challenges associated with that. But the ones I want to talk about that has only kind of surfaced recently is that enterprise IT systems control and manage and create a class of data, and they pretty much own it. They're not that dependent on other systems. They feed other systems, but they don't actually look to other systems to feed them. So, for example, you've got an HR system. You generate the information about payees and everything there is to know about them. CRM, that's where customer data is generated. It's managed there, and pretty much it from the initial load when you use the system, there's not a lot of interaction with other systems. Order management, same way, it owns the business transactions. Payable, accounts receivable, they'll get a feed, but basically they are the systems of record and they own it. The ICM system is very, very dependent on data from a lot of upstream sources, and that challenging is that not every upstream source was engineered to work really well with the ICM system. So you have data from disparate systems, it's modeled in different ways, and trying to make sense of it in that it was never intended to be made sense of, if you'll pardon the syntax there. And then the other thing, and we'll get to it, is timing issues, and the fact that every system looks at in a transactional way, whereas most ICM systems do. So the challenges we've got is that we're more dependent on the rest of the company than the rest of the company is dependent on anybody else. So timing issues and data temporality, and this is, I think, a pretty critical one. I've met very, very few customers in the world who go back and rerun prior periods. And the first question I ask on a project is, how often do you rerun them? And the first answer I get is, oh, we never do. And by the end of the conversation, it's, the entire year, every night, because things change in the past. ICM is partly about data and math and processes, but it's also about trying to incent those guys. And that ICM, we always need to store data effectively, if you will. So if I'm back to rerun June or July, I need to know what the world looked like in June or July, not what it looks like today. Sometimes it's not the way it looked in June or July either. Sometimes I need to make June or July look different than they looked at that time, and different from today as well. So, to see what a world looked like at a point in time, most IT systems really don't care about that. I mean, think about HR. What would reprocessing April mean to an HR system? That's not something they do. They do who was hired or who was terminated in that period. Maybe they can tell you something about leave of absence. Go back and essentially recalculate April. They'd be able to give a snapshot to the rest of the company about what the world looks like today from the HR perspective, the CRM perspective, or any other systems perspective. They speaking, look at the world in snapshot ways. So ICM needs to be very specific about when a change happened, and given that most upstream systems don't realize about that, that's an interesting challenge, and it's something that when we do ICM project, when we're maintaining ICM as a business as usual system later, constantly dealing with the fact that we're going back in time and nobody else quite even understands what that means from a business perspective. And ones for me is the way data is represented in a company. You might have a single object like a payee or a single event like a transaction that touches a lot of different systems. All look at it in a different way and have fundamentally different even use for them. So let's say a comp plan that pays half on booking and the other half on shipping or invoice or revenue recognition or whatever you want to call that event. Let's look at different ways different systems might actually model that same event. So Mary books a $1 million order to SteamTech Industries in the order management system. If you go to CRM, that's forecast as $1.3 million. At the very last minute, the customer beat her up for a discount. She gave it to them, and CR got updated. Now, show up as is a couple of different shipments, two different transactions, one to ST Industries Limited in London, and a 280K shipment to ST Industries PLC in Paris for a total of 780K. That comes out of fulfillment or the supply chain. Why are they different? Well, we may be out of stock on widgets, and so that's to be back ordered. Now, at that point, we look to accounts receivable, and we see a 390K invoice to SteamTech Inc. because they pay 50% on shipping, 50% on acceptance. One order, four different ways of driving the company, lots of different unique identifiers, and even the value is the same. So a human being could look at all of these things and say, oh, okay, I get it. This is what happened, and you could probably piece it together. Data from different systems, and you're trying to, reconcile the book and shipping with each other. You might not have a way to do that. Now, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to split the commission on booking and shipping, but at the same time, can you do it? Do you even have the ability to join these different representations of a data element, a single event in the history of the company? So basically what ends up happening is some poor guy down in sales ops or the comp team spent a lot of time just digging through orders trying to figure out what actually happened, and then creating new transactions that represent the data the way the ITM system needs it. Now, every industry is different. Everybody has a different way of modeling data and so on. But what I'm trying to get across here is that a lot of different systems contribute to paying this one commission on the comp plan, and it doesn't really support that in a systematic way. Somebody has to get involved and look at it. And lots of times there is no system of record for the data we need. One thing HR can tell us is who our payee is and who that payee reports to. But it doesn't necessarily that, John rolls credits to Mary, rolls credits to Sue. Always that John may work for Mary or may not, but Sue might be a system engineer way off to the side. And there's no organizational link between them. So goaling is something that's maintained by the incentive comp team, the comp team, the people who are running the ICM system, that they can look to for data from that. They get it from, they get it from wikis, they get it from phone calls and email. Sales territories, if Mary is selling, bicycles in the east and Larry is selling unicycles in the south, what is east or south? I mean, where do you make the distinction there? Where do you create a systematic representation of the world? Something that the ICM system has to maintain, the sales ops team needs to maintain it. And that definition can change year by year, or it could change in the middle of the year. What the sales finance people or the VP of sales needs the business to do to respond to market conditions, even decide that, New Jersey is east and North Carolina is south, that might change next week. How are we storing the data that into the comp plan? If I'm over my quota, I get a bonus or I get a higher rate. Well, where do those quotas come from? Again, they come from spreadsheets. They come from teams making decisions about the sales reps and the sales team and the sales cycle. And that information on, but it's not really us that we can go to and say, integrate with that and always be in sync with the rest of the company. So it comes from conversations. It comes from anywhere that a sales ops person can talk to a sales finance person, can talk to a salesperson about that information. So in the ICM system, there's a fair amount of very unstructured, informal data that without which we can't pay commissions and bonuses. So that data is something that, from a semantic perspective, is really scary. I mean, IT guys hate that. Processes. And when you read the comp plan, it says that you're going to get credit for what you sold, and we're going to apply some conditions to it, and some logic to it, and some math to it, and out come a commission amount. Job done. It's completely objective. Well, actually, paid commissions and bonuses knows that there's almost nothing objective about it. First of all, it's a squishy psychological problem as much as it is a technology problem, because what you're trying to do is influence the behavior of the sales guys that we can control. Not even applying a direct force to it. You're just saying, hey, if you do the right thing, you'll make more money. Well, making more money is a great thing. Everybody wants to do that, but interpret the comp plan be intriguing. It can be different from what you expect. Because while folks are coin operated, they are not machines. And just because we offer them $100 to do something, they may not decide that $100 is worth it. And if the measuring is something that comes at the end of their process, their cycle, we're not even controlling the behaviors we want to control. The carrot dangling from the stick in front of you is great, but what if I just don't particularly want that carrot? I still want to go down this other path. I'll do that. And now we have to go in and start messing with the plan to try and get it so that it actually drives the behaviors we're looking for and generally guide the sales reps to doing the things they do, or we want them to do, rather, not the things they want to do. So, the best you can do is apply influence but not direct force on people's behaviors. And part of the problem that goes with that is that everybody in the company practically has an interest in how that works. To make sure it's done in a fair and legal way. Finance needs to make the numbers work out right. Sales management, well, they get paid as well as manage their sales guys. Everybody has a finger in the pie. How we apply these influences to a bunch of guys to try and get them to do what we need them to do. And that's very strange. Please go ahead.
I was going to say it's the proverbial herding the cats, right? And I think anyone who's new to the space is surprised by all the different have input into sort of what they thought was maybe their standalone business problem. And the one group that you don't even have on that last bullet is IT, because a lot of times when you get the newbie guy that gets involved with the process, he the rules, why doesn't it work? Upgrade this thing in 3 years and call me later. And just a lack of appreciation for the ongoing adjusting and the people aspect that really comes into managing these systems as well.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that very few people get into doing incentive comp on purpose. They sort of fall into it, and sometimes I actually enjoy it. I've got to say I really enjoy the problems we face on this, but a whole lot of people are like, these guys are going to make me crazy because I've written these rules and they're not following them. Why don't they? Well, because they're reading the rules in a different way than you wrote them. And sometimes they're making money in ways that you didn't expect them to make money and that don't necessarily help the company either. And so, again, a lot of this stuff is based on data and systems. Some sales guys are very, very aware of which systems work and which data is good and which data is not to be trusted. I mean, they know that very quickly because they're all about optimizing their paycheck at the end of the month. And the thing which comes up around the process issue is, we've got a comp plan designer who gets a number from finance. This is the number we're going to announce to the street. So how am I going to come up with incentives that guide people to giving us that number at the end of the year. Speaking of finance function, is input from HR and legal and the VP of sales and so on. One is not represented very often in this process, and it's very unfortunate, is sales ops, the people who actually have to make the plan work. The plan is presented to them. It's supposed to be, middle of the last month of the quarter, of the last quarter. Often it's halfway into the following year, but even so, they're presented with this thing and told to make it so and make the checks go out on time. They weren't involved in designing the plan. So you end with the one who changed this to feasibility challenges. I originally had something else, basically unintended consequences where, a perfectly reasonable thing to put this plan in place, except for the fact that we can't pay on it, whether it's your IM system in general or the systems around it. One thing I've seen a million times is the new customer bonus. You absolutely want your hunter-type sales guys out there gathering new customers together and know all the revenue you can. But the important thing is every new customer I get means my competitors didn't get that customer. So I don't even care about the revenue. I just want a bonus based on how many customers did you steal from our competitors. Yeah. How to find a new customer? Well, that's a bit of a challenge. And I've seen a few customers or very few clients of mine can actually do it in a driven way. The thing you do is you look for a customer name that isn't already in the transaction table. Okay, that's great, but the sales guy hasn't figured out that C Corp can be represented as A.B.C.Corp versus AB Incorporated versus, Associated, company corporation versus whatever. I think it's the mail and the shipment will get to that customer. They can come up with 100 different ways to create a customer name. Sometimes it's by accident. Generally speaking, it's on purpose because you got a new customer bonus. So again, from sales ops has to sit down there and come up with a magic way to reconcile, is customer somebody we've seen before, even though the data doesn't support that question.
Yeah, an example that I see all the time or quite frequently is, margin. Pay margin on margin down at the transaction level, and it does make a lot of sense to reward people for profitable business, but you can actually compute margin down to the transaction level, and you run around, chase your tail for a little bit, and you come up with proxies, and it just becomes a very complicated process, and then you start to lose the hearts and minds of your sales reps there because they just don't even understand how you're computing this margin proxy. But great design concept, hard to put into practice in most companies.
And that's an issue we have is that a comp plan designer is going to design a great comp plan sometimes, often, generally. They'll design a great comp plan, but it doesn't mean it's great for this company with this company's system and process challenges. Does that mean you give up the metric that you care about? Maybe. Or maybe you find some way to represent it to the sales guys so they'll understand it. The important challenge is that if you have a mix that's data dependent and you can't explain how that's going to be calculated to your sales guys, you've instantly lost the focus on selling and it turns into a focus on making sure they're being compensated properly. And sometimes, that they're not being compensated. Give up. So I laid out all the reasons why incentive comp can't work in a company. The situation is we've cut ops managing a huge expense line based on data and processes they don't own. And that expense line is pretty huge. I mean, in the tech world, I think the benchmark is 15% of revenue goes out to the sales guy. In terms of commissions and bonuses. 15% of revenue on a biller company is $150 million, and that's enough money to get people's attention. it's being managed by people who don't own the process and who are being blamed when it doesn't work and don't have the power or the authority to make it work. Does that work? Well, it's not exactly rocket science to say maybe the rest of the enterprise should pitch in on this. I've seen a lot of recently, and it's growing. I'm seeing more and more of it as time passes, is the idea of the center of excellence, the function center of excellence. Sometimes it's called the steering committee, sometimes the operating group. You can call it whatever you want, but we're going to call it the center of excellence for the purposes of this conversation. The steering committee as a separate object, and we'll talk about that a little later. The idea of a center of excellence or a steering committee, the typical is, and back to the problem statement, this is bigger than sales ops. Sales doesn't have the power to make this work. They are very dependent on other parts of the company. The way the rest of the company sets up data, the way the rest of the company does its processes, and the things the rest of the company is trying to get from them. You know, it tends to be the tail, not wag the dog. It's just the other way around. So, is that if you actually bring the other constituents, if you actually care about compensation in the company, get them together and explain these are the issues we're facing here at Company X. In general, compensation is hard, but at Company X, we identify, you know, what budget is. We can't identify what margin is. We can't identify what a number looks like. And reasons why we can't. People who actually have some visibility into this process will step up and help. That compensation process works a lot better, and it actually works to do what it's supposed to do, sending your sales guy to deliver revenue to you or margin or what have you. You representation from the function groups that impact or are impacted by the incentive comp process. It can't be just the newest business analyst in each of these groups. It needs to be people who know how each of these functions works, some control over how this function works, has some control over what they can do to change to make it better. So it's a really senior group. It's sales management, because they're the ones being impacted most by the way ICM works, because they care about the results that come out of this. HR, because we got to keep it legal. And system target owners, who are the ones who provide the data, Can you still hear me?
Off there a little bit. I think IT was the last one you were on.
Yeah, that my phone just suddenly burped. Yeah, the source and target system owners and services. This is something near and dear to Spectrum's heart, because that's the kind of work they do. In other words, if you have vendors or outside helping your system, they absolutely should be part of this, because they contribute to making it work or making it not work. Of course, ops, because they're the ones who are the people being impacted most by this. What makes a center of excellence work? Accountability is the main thing. They need to show up. They need to be invested in it. Some control over what they can give and what they need from the system. These would be, let's look at the comp plans. Let's look at the way the company is trying to function here. Let's look at that we're trying to deliver our revenue number at the end of the year. Let's do it. Do they work? Do they make sense? Do they fit in with the company culture? Do they fit in with the company systems? Are there limitations that we can't get past at this point? That each of them needs to bring to the ICM Center of Excellence. They need to bring the sense of, we're all constituents of this process. They have the ability to make decisions, and they have to be willing to make decisions. A decision is going to be costly or a big drawn resources. They need access to executive leadership who can say, okay, we need to put a place here that actually gives us to provide the thing you're looking for. And the important thing is they need to understand the company's culture, people, and systems, because problems you run into are not obvious. See, in telco, for example, is for various telco clients, and they all have the same problem, which is, if a customer buys a contract for a phone in one store, the person who sold that phone to the customer will get the commission for it, and that's great. Many of those don't have systems that will tie the cancellation of the contract in a different store back first to that. And I think this should be so hard, but it is. And one of the things that's been that every guy in every telco store knows is if we're coming to the end of the month and I'm about to hit my number, I get my friends to come in, buy contracts, and then cancel 3 days later down the street. And this gets the finance people and so on who will come along and try and find a way to that. But for years, every guy in every store knows, hey, close to your number, just get your old college roomie to come by and buy a phone. A system and culture problem that people need to be aware of, because there's nothing obvious in the comp plan that's going to tell you that that's something that we need to address. Everybody in sales or the ICM function knows about the problem. There's not what they can do to fix it. And that's the kind of thing that you need help. They need the rest of the company to step up and say, okay, here's a problem. Here's something that we should think about. We may not get it this year. We at least know that we need to put this on the plate of IT people putting together projects and so on in order to solve this particular problem. So when do they meet? I'm going to this from the last calendar year fiscal year, and everything's based on quarters. But if you've got trimesters and your year starts in March, fine, change around and make it make sense for you. But the important thing is really a couple of boxes. You want to meet at the beginning of the fourth quarter to start thinking about what next year's comments are going to be. And at the end of the fourth quarter to finalize those plans after you've all talked about them. You've dealt with configuration issues, you've dealt with the feasibility issues, you've forced the new data as needed, or realized we don't have the data for this metric, and sadly we'll have to let it go. Here is in many ways the most important meeting, but they're all important. So at the end of the year, we go to February. The first thing should be really, how did the plan rollout go? Was it smooth? Did we run into hiccups? Did the sales guys understand it? Did we do a good job reviewing it with them? Did the pay run actually make sense? Were we, okay, well, never mind, we can't do it. We're going to just pay draws until, figure out how the systems work. So in other words, make the plans in the fourth quarter, you implement the plans, let's see how that implementation went. At the quarter, review sales progress and see, do we need to make any mid-course corrections? Are there anything we should be looking at differently? Second quarter, review sales progress, review process issues, because at this point you're going to know pretty well that, hey, something broke. We implemented a new metric and it turns out it's not doing what we thought it would do, or we say the commission structure works and now we're paying out everybody in the high rate even though our revenue is a little lower. So questions you want to answer mid-year. We get to the end of the third quarter when you start thinking about how are we doing on Q3, but also let's start planning for next year. Well, I mean, better, but I would see a minimum of these 5 major meetings every year where everybody needs to be able to show up for these meetings and make them.
In terms of some of the bad examples, how one of the delayed rollouts and, they could have benefited from a more rigorous process that you've seen.
Oh, yeah. You know that there's going to be a conference room full of executives waiting for my plans to go out middle of the fourth quarter, and you haven't delivered those plans yet. Problem. Quite often the plans don't go out because we couldn't get legal to sign off on them, or we couldn't get the sales VP to sign off on them. If it's the situation, having a bunch of people staring at you in the middle of November, saying, gee, I'm not going to be ready to turn these plans in for a couple of months, that's an embarrassing thing. You're going to find a way to make it work. That's part of what makes the Center of Excellence work, is if everybody takes it seriously and everybody understands it's important, those staring at the table when you haven't done your bit, that's something that's a motivator. But if you don't have a group of people coming together on a regular basis, all the people have to sign off on the comp plan before you present it to sales ops. You're going to end up doing it serially rather than in parallel, and that serial, half the comp plans we see don't come out until June.
David, we did get a question here. We should, a point of clarification, we keep, referring to sales ops and make sure we include them. And then the question is, are we assuming that sales ops is the group that is in charge of the administration? And I believe we are, because that sometimes lands in different departments and they may be called something different.
You're right, and I should apologize for that. One of the things that's interesting about ICM is it doesn't always live in the same department, same company, even let alone across companies. I think of sales ops as the group of people who just kind of keep the lights and the wheels turning and the checks going out on a regular basis. They're not salespeople. They're the people who administer the sales comp plans, among other things. They administer the forecasting. They administer some other things. But sales ops is the thing I'm looking at for that.
It's funny. 5 years ago, I think that was probably it's probably still true, but the vast majority was down in kind of a sales ops, sales support function, at least in my experience. And then it's made 5 to 8 years kind of shift, but I've seen it move majority of, but a sales finance or move, sort of housed in finance more than under sales support. And you can run into it in an HR support organization and sometimes with IT or even IT supporting, not necessarily entirely, but sort of significantly, and it really does vary from business company to company.
Yeah, the things that makes it really challenging for the ICM vendors, they don't even know who to call. When they're cold calling companies, who do they call to find out who pays commissions and who owns that department? It makes for very frustrated sales guys. I speak from some experience there when they tell me who they should be speaking to. And generally, it's not HR, but it's not invariably true either. I mean, sometimes it is. It's not paying people the same way. Sales about paying people in different ways. So, but it could live anywhere, and you don't really know. So I call it generically sales ops. I'm an old guy. That's where he used to live. A special class of the Center of Excellence, if you will, is when you're actually going to implement an ICM tool, or when you've already got an ICM tool, but you're going to be implementing a different sales group or a different department, or you're going to be handling something that happened after a merger and acquisition. In other words, you got a project here. It's not business as usual. It's hands on deck to make this project work. So what I generally run into most often is the steering committee, but again, it's very, very similar to the Center of Excellence. With involvement from all the constituents in the ICM process, you're going to have a project that's behind the 8 ball early. I mean, it's not enough for the sales ops and wherever that lives. It's enough for them to define the system requirements. You need active involvement from all other people to make sure the system configured in such a way that everybody gets what they get out of it, and everybody who needs to contribute to it is well aware of what their obligations are. Confidence is a good place to look for constituents, but in this case, you probably want people a little closer to the ground level, if you will. Because they're the ones who are actually going to have to make the work happen, and they're the ones who are going to know the ins and outs of the edge cases and the strange conditions that need to be satisfied. So it's very important that you have the steering committee set up early and that it meets often. And monthly is not too often. One of the things that doesn't work is the person shows up on the project kickoff date and then shows up on the go live date, if there is one, to say what a great job we all did. But that person needs to be there from the start and make it work. You can't just come in at the last minute. It's got to be a very active steering committee. The key that we've talked about, ICM is hard. It's not like other applications. It has many more people who can make it work or make it fail than most other systems in a company. All those who have their fingers in the pie and they care about the outcome. So since they care about the outcome, they need to care about how the outcome is finally achieved. They need to be there helping the system work. And responsible involvement is the key for that. And the one that we clarified a little earlier.
I have a couple questions that I did take. Which one should I hear? With a few contractors who are deeply engraved in our ICM system/processes and have been for many years, does it make sense to include them in our Center of Excellence?
So, yeah, I think you want everybody who knows the bodies are buried to be there. They need to be very.
Yeah, I agree. I think it goes back to maybe a quick point that you had made, but certainly under the managed service note. I mean, really, anybody who has that core memory of whether or not they're a direct employee or not, I think is valuable to bring in. So,
the world for the company. I mean, now I'm up in Canada, and half the people I'm dealing with here, who I think are client customer employees, are actually contractors. I mean, it's a cultural thing as much as anything. There are lots of parts of the world where you're not going to have employees running your system. So I bring in the outsiders if they can contribute and if they help you make this thing succeed.
There's a question that just came in, so I'll bump this up to the top of the queue. What strategies have you seen in getting C-level support to see Center of Excellence as a long-term solution as opposed to a short-term solution?
Sure, the company fails its audit on the compensation process. That usually gets attention. That's a little bit catastrophic. A matter of trying to win the hearts and minds by explaining, A, we are a huge expense line, and you cannot ignore it, and B, it's out of our control. You need to force the people who care about the result to contribute to the result. It is really a company culture problem. If the CEO doesn't think it's important, you're not going to get the support. So the CEO, 10% of our revenue is going out in commissions and bonuses, and we've got a 10 to 50% error rate. That's real money. Something we need to track down. That's something we need to make sure it works.
It would be, I think, if you take it all the way back to your sales compensation plan is supposed to influence the behavior of your selling reps to drive the strategy of your overall organization. I mean, that's this massive variable investment that you're making to try to move the whole company forward, right? You got to take it seriously, and you got to get involved. And today, if that is difficult to do, then maybe you question even why you have a variable pay program, right? I mean, so I think people aren't going to necessarily tell you that, oh, fine, let's get rid of it, but that's maybe the other challenge to it. I mean, we're spending all this money, taking all this effort, and I can't capture, get your attention, and it's a lost opportunity to really get with those sort of key stakeholders. Hey, David, we're right up at 10:45, 46, so I'm gonna go to the last slide here, and I have a couple more questions. We'll follow up with those individuals afterwards. And get them a sort of a private answer, maybe a Q&A kind of at the end of thank you email to everybody. If anybody does have more questions or wishes to speak to David or me or any other SPM ICM type topics, our emails are there, and Spectrum website's also noted right there if you want to hit our website as well. Dave, I wanted to thank you for your support today and thank everybody for their attendance. I hope you guys have a great day and, one left and then the weekend. So, everybody, thank you.
Thanks, Dan.